Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. Today is the Wonderful World of Writing Wednesday, and so we will thus be taking a look at chapter 2 of my book, Baby It's Cold Outside. But before we do that, let's just get into our scripture of the day. The scripture of the day comes from Nehemiah 9 verse 11. We are reading from the World English Bible as usual, and let's go. Nehemiah 9:11 says, "You divided the sea before them so that they went through the middle of the sea on the dry land, and you cast their pursuers into the depths as a stone into the mighty waters." Now, what I feel like God is saying here is God is busy talking to everyone that's going through a difficult time right now. Whether it be in a workplace situation or at home, with family members, with friends, whatever you're going through right now, God is saying that He will protect you. He's saying that He will watch over you. He will not let those against you overcome you or overtake you. But He's also saying that you should not forget to be grateful. Praise Him now because you know already what the outcome will be and that He will protect you and uplift you. So thank you, God, for that awesome message for today. And let's get into chapter 2 of my book. I apologize if my voice sounds a little bit hoarse. I have no idea what's going on with that. Okay. Chapter 2. Maggie woke up slowly and stretched with a smile. It was her usual way to wake up and left her feeling positive about her day. She blinked and rubbed her eyes a few times to get the sleep out of them, and yawned as big a yawn as she could muster, then proceeded to sit up straight. It wasn't until the blankets fell to her waist and her skin began to crawl with cold that she noticed that she was naked. Birthday suit naked. And she never slept naked. She gasped in alarm, pulled the blankets up to cover her chest, and took a look around the room for some indication as to where she was. The bed she was in was huge. Well, perhaps not huge, but bigger than the average double bed. The sheets she clutched to her body and sat on were white. Who has white sheets anymore? She asked herself, frowning, distinctly remembering that sheets came in several different colors now. Maggie shook her head to clear her thoughts. Now was not the time to question her perhaps captive's decorative style, she thought, as she continued her perusal of the room. She glanced at the other two blankets covering the bed. One was a blue and red plaid duvet, and the other was a deep stormy grey. Those were typically male colors for bedding, she thought with interest, then resumed assessing her potential prison. There was a bedside table on either side of the bed in some tan-colored wood, which were attached to the headboard behind her. In the center of the headboard was a sideways 8, just below the intricate center curve of the top of the headboard. She muttered, then suddenly recognized the symbol. Infinity? Did that mean she was in the bed of a married couple? Only one way to find out, Sherlock, she muttered, disgusted by her inability to complete the task without interrupting herself with more questions she could not answer. She glanced at the two bedside tables first, absently noting the blank digital clock and a glass of water along with a small metallic lamp sporting a white lampshade on the right-hand side table. She noted the absence of any pictures or personal effects and thought it odd, but supposed they could be in the drawers or somewhere else in the house. She looked further around the room, seeing two white doors on either side of the bed, the black cupboards with silver handles, and two large bookshelves on either side of a chair and coffee table below a window before her. There was nothing personal at all to indicate where she was or who her would-be captor could be. Grim, she turned her eyes to the desk against the left wall of the room, which she saw was in pretty much the same state as the room. It sat below a window, although the heavy grey curtains were pulled back to allow some light into the room. The curtains matched nicely with the dark blue walls, she noted with appreciation, then frowned at herself. She was quite easily trapped in this room with no escape, and there was nothing personal in the room at all. Everything besides the bed where she now sat was pristine. Kind of like my life, she mused silently. Not one to sit back and be inactive, Maggie decided to get out of bed and play peekaboo with the cupboards. Perhaps she'd be able to find a weapon in case she needed it. But as soon as she swung both of her feet out of the bed and put pressure on them, she screamed in agony. Her injured, throbbing left ankle gave up under her weight, sending her crashing to the floor in a tangle of sheets. Suddenly, the door on the other side of the bed swung open with force, and footsteps paused for a second, then rushed around the bed to where Maggie had frozen beneath the thin white sheets. She suddenly heard someone clicking their teeth and felt as a hand grabbed hold of one of her legs. Maggie screamed and began to thrash and kick at her captor, yelping in pain when her injured foot connected with a piece of rock-hard flesh. Daniel growled in frustration. "Hold still, damn it! I'm trying to help you," he said through clenched teeth from where he was on his haunches at her feet. Definitely a male captor, Maggie thought with a sliver of fear as she heard the deepened, rough voice. "I've heard that one before, and it did not end well for me," Maggie replied, strained, still kicking despite the pain making her sweat. The frown on Daniel's face soon replaced itself with wonder. So this was what the little angel sounded like, he mused. Her voice sounded like liquid chocolate. Not too dark and low, but not too soft and light that it sounded squeaky. It was like an almost perfect timbre, but it had a scratchy edge to it. He frowned. He should have thought to bring water. "Get away from me, you psycho!" she shouted, still kicking and thrashing wildly. This pulled Daniel out of his musings, and he realized that he was holding onto her leg while her head was still under the opaque sheet. She saw something that made even him blush and rethink his description of her as an angel, and released a shudder and pain-filled sob. Daniel immediately let go of the appendage and moved back. "Sorry, I didn't realize how I must have come across to you," he said softly and slowly, like talking to a child. "Will you come out from under the sheet so I can help you?" "I don't need your help," Maggie said defensively, moving her hands around under the sheet. It was at this point Daniel realized that she was tangled beneath the sheets. He moved forward to help her. However, she must have seen his shadow over the blanket because she hissed, "Don't come any closer!" Daniel moved back once again as her head soon surfaced, and her furious, determined look turned to one of awe as she clutched the sheet to her chest. "Am I dreaming?" she asked, feeling butterflies within her belly as she studied him. He was beautiful, an angel, she thought, with beautiful crystal blue eyes, high cheekbones, a slightly bent nose as if it had been broken once, but it only added to his appeal instead of detracting from it. He had a strong chin, liquid dark gold blonde hair cut army short on the sides and long enough to make a short fringe on the top when brushed forward, one of the latest styles she knew, but his was haphazardly brushed to the side. He too had a wide neck and more sculpted muscles than she had ever seen up close in her life. He was robust and had a yummy six-pack she felt like tracing her hands over. Why was he half naked? She wondered, but quickly squashed the thought. She'd prefer him to stay that way, even if he was a psycho killer. He was the good kind of psycho. Slut, her mind provided, but she clamped down on that thought too. Who needed that kind of negativity? Eh? Daniel asked, eyebrows raised, as he was hypnotized by the forest skin of her beautiful almond-shaped eyes. An angel or a dream? She whispered, adding the last as an afterthought. Daniel frowned, wondering if she was hallucinating or just crazy, when out of the corner of his eye he saw an errant lock of hair caught in the sunlight shining on his back through the window behind him. The lock looked like glittering gold. He could just about imagine that his glowing hair may appear to her like some sort of halo. This caused Daniel to frown further and click his teeth in irritation, turning a scowl on her. She breathed out heavily. Definitely not an angel or dream then, she said with what sounded like disappointment to him. Not wanting to explore the thought, Daniel, still scowling, asked, "May I help you now?" He regretted it as soon as the question tumbled out of his mouth. The suspicion had returned to her eyes, and she drew the sheet closer to her body. Far be it from him to point out that while the sheet was opaque, it was also still see-through enough that the sunlight falling over his shoulder, that he could see her chest peeking at him. "No, you may not," she replied, crossing her arms over her chest. "And my eyes are up here, thank you very much," Maggie snapped. Daniel swallowed roughly and forced himself to look up at her irritated face. While she thought the action had covered her breast, they actually raised him better for his view, but his eyes clung desperately to her lips, trying to ignore the view and pay attention to the conversation. He had the decency to look sheepish, she noted, and kept her eyes on his face. If she looked any lower, she'd be as distracted as he'd been. "So the answer is no?" he asked, causing her to sigh with exasperation. "Yes," she said angrily. Distracted as she was by his beautiful body, she needed anger to remind her that he could be potentially dangerous to her body, not to mention her mind, which had supplied that she may want him to be potentially dangerous to her body. Another thought she swiftly pushed away. Truly, his washboard abs were magnificent and a mighty distraction. "Questions first, and then I'll decide if you can help me." "Fair enough," Daniel said, and gave a small acquiescent nod as he crossed his arms over his chest, mimicking her action. It did little to hide his magnificence, but simply put his giant muscular arms on display. "How the hell did you get so buff?" she blurted nervously, aware of her toes curling and heat pooling in her lower belly. "Calm down, girl." It was Daniel's turn to sigh, exasperated. "Of all the things you could have asked first, that's what you want to know." "Hey, you're in your natural element here. I don't know where here is, or why I'm naked, or why you're so hot, and I kind of think I may be going crazy, so that was all my mind could supply at such short notice, okay?" She rushed out vulnerably, avoiding his eyes. "You think I'm hot?" Daniel asked and gave her a dimpled, lopsided grin. She growled in response, causing him to roll his eyes and reply, "I work out a lot. When you live alone, it pays to keep yourself healthy." He didn't think he was necessarily anything much compared to the men he'd seen on TV, in magazines and such, but the way she was looking at him, kneeling before her as if he was some tasty morsel, made him flex his muscles just a tiny bit. She half gasped and suddenly growled, then hurriedly continued her questions. He couldn't resist the grin as she tightly shut her eyes. "Where am I? And who are you?" "Daniel Roddy Winthrop, and you're in the Everglade Mountains," he responded easily. She remarked and opened one eye to peer at him, as if she didn't trust herself when both of her eyes were open. Why does that name sound so familiar? Daniel almost laughed at how cute she looked trying to put a face to the name, but her words cut through his aroused brain and stopped him mid-smile. "You're sure you don't know who I am?" he asked stiffly, cursing himself for being a fool for what felt like the 100th time since last night. He could have just let a fan of his books into his personal home and gotten himself trapped with her here. That could potentially be a dangerous situation for him. Her eyebrows shot toward her hairline. "Should I?" Daniel almost sighed aloud with relief at the fact that she didn't recognize his name and seemed suspicious. "You're not some psycho killer who's going to kill and eat me, are you?" She had seemingly noticed his relief, but he seemed appalled that she could have even asked him that. His reaction alone abated most of her fears even before he spoke in a sardonic tone. "No, I'm the most passive person that I know." He decided not to point out that if he was a psycho killer, there'd be little chance of any truth coming out of his mouth, and either way, stranded as they were, she had no chance of getting away from him. "No offense, but that's not very reassuring since you live alone," was Maggie's reply. Daniel gave her another one of his crooked smiles. "Touché." After a few moments, Maggie looked around the room, finally uttering, "So," when the silence had stretched on for an unbearable second. "Do you remember why you were out in the snow?" Daniel interrupted, stood and pulled his wicker chair across toward himself. He wanted to offer her the seat, but at the way her shoulders hunched and the fearful expression she had on her face, closed his mouth and sat down, staring at her on the ground. She didn't look very happy. He pegged that down to the fact that she was still seated in a mere sheets on the cold wood floor, but she still wasn't ready to accept his help. She, in fact, released the breath he was sure she didn't know she'd been holding, and grabbed up more sheets, either to warm or protect herself. Either way, the action now completely hid her beautiful, distracting chest from his gaze. "In the snow?" she echoed. "You don't remember?" asked Daniel grimly. Wait, you said Everglade, right?" she asked a little excitedly. Daniel nodded and arched an eyebrow. Maggie lay a hand over her mouth in shock and gasped out her response. "My mom," she breathed out worriedly. "I have to check on my mom. I have to leave now." Daniel grimaced. "Well, unfortunately you can't." "And why the hell not?" was Maggie's angry reply. "We snowed in," he admitted apologetically. She breathed out as if she had been punched right in the gut. "What do you mean we're snowed in?" She sounded more astonished than anything else. "I mean exactly what I said. We're snowed in," was Daniel's irritated reply. He hated repeating himself. This was, in fact, the most conversation he'd had with a human being in person in the last 10 years or so, he silently acknowledged. "Oh, this can't be happening to me," Maggie groaned and covered her face with her hands. "At any moment now, I'm going to wake up in my bed and Jared is going to give me a big, fat, sloppy kiss and bring me my newspaper." "Hey, this is no walk in the park for me either," Daniel objected, scowling, ignoring the slight pang of jealousy. "I have to be stuck in here with you for a couple of days." "A couple of days?" Maggie squeaked with horror and dropped her hands to cover her mouth, deciding to ignore the insult. "Well, at least until someone gets out here to remove the snow blocking the exit, and that could take hours. Or days," Daniel shrugged. "Okay," Maggie breathed out, formulating a plan. "We can just call someone to come in." "Don't you think I would have done that first?" Daniel asked condescendingly, clicking his teeth. Maggie decided to ignore all of his rude behavior in that moment. He just seemed to be plain surly with all his scowling and verbal jabs. He was not the one in a predicament who could not get to the ones that he loved. He lived alone, and he didn't seem like the family type that she could see. "No phones?" Maggie asked, disheartened. "I suppose a tree must have knocked over the phone line somewhere," he admitted and crossed his arms over his chest again, as if bracing himself for some type of onslaught. "And the power lines," Maggie groaned. "Ugh. No coffee and no food," she muttered sulkily. Daniel's eyebrows rose so high above his eyes, Maggie wondered that they didn't pop off his forehead and fly away. "What?" she asked, puzzled at his look. He shook his head as if to clear it before he answered. "Nothing, Never mind." Daniel was still stunned at the fact that she had thought the same thing he had just a few hours prior, that he had difficulty putting the experience into words. Okay, I think we should stop there because I don't want to read for like half an hour. But thank you for joining me, and we will do part 2 next week, Wednesday, of Baby It's Cold Outside Chapter 2. If you don't feel like waiting for that to happen, please go ahead and you are welcome to check out my Wattpad page, in which the entire story is available for you. Completely, no interruptions, on Wattpad for free, for Mahala. Everything is for Mahala. And you can just take a look at it there, which will be linked in the description. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to my weird voice right now. And please have an absolutely wonderful, miraculous, and marvelous day. Bye.